Yesterday at John McCain's funeral, Father Eddie Reese, who is a Jesuit from our West Coast province, Eddie served for many years as president of Brophy Prep, our Jesuit high school in Phoenix, where John McCain's sons went, and he became a very good friend of the family. Yesterday, Eddie gave the homily at John McCain's funeral. And as a good Jesuit, he quoted another Jesuit, the poet Jared Manley Hopkins. So, of course, I'm going to quote both of them today. It's from Hopkins' poem, As the Kingfisher Catches Fire. And Eddie said, I say more. The just man justices, keeps grace that keeps all his goings graces, acts in God's eye what in God's eye he is, Christ. For Christ plays in 10,000 places, lovely in limbs, lovely in eyes not his, to the Father through the features of men's faces. The words are funny, the syntax is all twisty, but one line has stood out for me, that very first line. The just man justices. Hopkins turns the adjective just into a verb, to justice. The just man justices. Or to translate from the Victorian meter, the just man acts justly. For what else is it that we expect of people? If you think back to the prophet Micah and him proclaiming that, what is it that the Lord requires? Only to do justice, to love goodness, to walk humbly with your God. There it is again. The just person justices, acts justly. Or as Micah says, does justice. We hear those echoes in the letter of James, from which we will be reading the next 5 weeks. James captures the spirit of traditional Jewish piety, in which love of God is to be translated into deeds of loving kindness toward the most vulnerable members of the community. And therefore, James can be very specific in his idea of justice, or acting justly. To care for orphans and widows, he says, in their affliction, and to keep oneself unstained by the world. And it has to happen consciously. The enacting of the self that Jared Manley Hopkins refers to in his poem cannot happen unconsciously or automatically. Rather, it means becoming one's highest self, or acting to the highest of one's capacity. Therefore, a person is not just unless he behaves justly. The implication is that one is not fully a human being unless one does so. That being just is part of the essence of who we are, insofar as the striving for moral perfection is part of our basic existence. And therefore, if we extend this to the idea of God's immanence in the world and the Christian belief that Christ dwells within the hearts of all of us in creation, then it is by the grace of God that humans are what we are, because it was only through divine grace that Christ came to redeem us from sin. Our humble acceptance of God's grace, that is the first gesture of a fully Christian life. And this acceptance will lend grace to our everyday comings and goings and will allow us to act, as Hopkins says, in God's eye, what in God's eye we are. So when James in our second reading asserts that all good giving and every perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of lights, James reminds us of the importance of the action of grace in our lives, that we are completely reliant on God's grace. And as I've mentioned many times before, grace that is always available, grace that is always free, grace that is always triumphant. That it is by the grace of God, and not through anything we merit, not through anything we earn or somehow bribe God to do, but it is by a free gift that it could be said of us, the just one justices. That we act justly, that we do justice, that this is part of who we are as a community of believers. And so James can invite us to humbly welcome the word that has been planted in you and is able to save your souls. In many ways, this was also the assurance that Moses was giving the people in today's first reading. For what great nation is there that has God so close to it as the Lord? Our God is to us whenever we call upon him. For there really isn't any record anywhere in ancient history of any tribe or nation asserting a personal relationship, something interactive, with its god or gods. Many gods were remote figures who were feared. They were capricious, they were fickle. But Israel's God wanted to be in a relationship with the people, a personal relationship bound by a covenant. Who else had a relationship that was as defined as that of the people to their Lord? And that was Moses' point. Now, Israel, hear the statutes and decrees which I am teaching you to observe, that you may live, and you may enter in and take possession of the land which the Lord, the God of your fathers, is giving you. Moses was never really about following rules blindly, as what happens with the Pharisees Jesus encounters in today's gospel. Moses was all about right relationship with the Lord. It was a relationship that demanded certain behaviors from the people, to act justly, to do justice, all with the grace of God. That was a basic part of this relationship, because that is what the Lord would do. We've been faced with many questions of justice lately, and it's something we should continue to include in our prayers, that with God's grace we can continue to translate our words into deeds, our intentions into actions. That as James challenges us, we may be doers of the word and not hearers only. Once again, Hopkins. I say more. The just man justices, keeps grace, that keeps all his goings graces, acts in God's eye what in God's eye he is, Christ. For Christ plays in 10,000 places, lovely in limbs and lovely in eyes not his, to the Father through the features of men's faces.